a co-founder for a nonprofit, Global Ed Professionals, which works primarily with ESL organizations, but also with universities and supporting transnational education and the students there. And I've had opportunity to work closely with Trinity, which we'll hear more from during this call. So very happy to be here and add to this conversation.
Thank you so much, Jeff. And I just have to also mention that TESOL was my very first conference presentation many, many moons ago, very early in my career when I was always great to have TESOL colleagues on the call. Thanks so much. Shankar.
Thank you, Maureen, and thank you to HEIIC for inviting me to this conversation. My journey started, as I mentioned earlier, as a student who took the TOEFL exam to come to the US for my graduate school. Subsequent to that, finishing my doctorate in economics, I became a faculty member, worked as an SIO in a small private university, working with international students, understanding the nuances of working with diverse groups of international students. I ran an engineering program in China, which was a different set of challenges. Currently, my role is I'm the executive director for international affairs in the Chancellor's Office of the CSU, California State University. We are a 23 university campus, universities that are the largest public university. We have about 16,000, 17,000 international students. We certainly are looking to see how language assessment is critical in the success of our students. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Alex.
Thank you very much, Maureen, and thank you to the HEIIC again for hosting this. So my name is Alex Thorpe, and I'm head of the Centrally Coordinated Markets at Trinity College London. And I know, well, how many of you will know Trinity? But one thing we do, we operate in the arts space, dance, music, drama, but we provide English language assessments. We're here to talk about those. I come from an academic background at Trinity. Before that, I was a teacher trainer in the English language teaching space. So really interested to dive in and to explore English language assessments for admissions purposes.
I really appreciate the diverse and rich perspectives that you bring to the work that we all do in this sector and also to our conversation today. And shout out to all the folks who are joining us today on the live call and all those who will join us on the replay. So we've got folks tuning in from sunny South Florida, chilly Chicago, foggy Seattle. I'm loving these descriptors. From the 316, so that's super niche. So if you know what that means, you can post it in the chat. From Los Angeles and Stratford-upon-Avon, New York City, Indiana, India, Winnipeg, Manitoba. So welcome to all of our worldwide viewers today. And foggy Seattle, I will be sure to bring my raincoat when I leave at 4:30 a.m. for Seattle tomorrow morning. So I encourage you to continue the chat that you've already started here in our chat, and also to weigh in on the polls on the right-hand side if you've not done so. Our third icon down on the right-hand side is a poll. And I'm going to ask you to kick us off, audience, with letting us know how you feel about this question. How do you define a successful student journey? Is it retention rate, graduation rate, class participation, perhaps all of the above? Or maybe you have some other poll options that you would have liked to have seen. And if that's the case, please let us know in the chat. You've got questions for our panelists. Please put that in the Q&A section, which is the second icon down on the right-hand side. So how do you define a successful student journey? Well, panelists, our audience has said, for the most part, 95% of our audience who have weighed in on the poll say all of the above: retention rate, graduation rate, class participation. So we'll be getting into what those look like in terms of the conversation around language assessment as we go through. But I want to start off with a really heavy question for you. And it's talking about students, their diverse learning styles, their cultural context, and the goals of today's students. And how can we design and deliver language assessments today, given all of those factors, without compromising academic rigor? Alex, I'm going to ask you to start on this.
Yeah, thank you, Maureen. I mean, for me, this really is around the personalization. You know, every individual that takes these tests will be them for admissions purposes, and we need that academic rigor that sits at the heart of all of this. But really, it is around that person, and that these tests can be personalized. They can involve the person. It can give them agency over the language they own and they use. And I think this is around having tasks that are really based on real life, authentic activity. So the kind of tasks a candidate will use, not just in the test, but they're going to carry through into their everyday life. So, and the opportunity, as I say, to be personalized, to use language, maybe around the subject they're going to read, but it has to be not just something that's so framed and prescriptive that it's one size fits all, but a test that's designed to be able to encapsulate the individual and reward, if you like, and pull out the language from that individual. So putting the candidate at the heart of the assessment.
Shankar, something to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at proficiency in language, it's such a nuanced matter. If you think about India, where people speak a lot of different languages, and often by necessity, they speak in English to each other. And that's another way of sort of making sure that you actually are proficient in a language, right? As opposed to a different country where English is a subject that they might take within their K through 12 system as a subject matter, just like geography or something. But the use of English then might not be the one that happens in a day-to-day setting, right? So their proficiency needs to be tested differently than, say, somebody from India. And India by itself is also very different. If you look at some tier 1 cities versus tier 3, tier 4 cities, the proficiencies might vary quite significantly. So what we're trying to do here is to test them, reach them at that level where they are, and figure out where their proficiency is. Because at the end of the day, when they come to an institution like ours, we want to make sure, Maureen, to the poll question, right? We want to make sure that the students are assimilating well, they're succeeding well, they're graduating, they're having these outcomes. So, you know, to Alex's point, we have to figure out a way to test these students so that we know that they're able to speak, but what is that level and how do we kind of meet that?
Yeah, and I'll just add in there, when we talk about the confluence of the cultural background, the social impact, as well as the learning styles, if you will, or the diverse learning styles of the students, assessment needs to be much more than just, you know, can you conjugate your verbs and put things in the correct context. I think a lot of it will capture as the assessments grow in their strengths here. Yeah, capturing these, what do you call them, 21st century skills, you know, the motivation, the critical thinking that is needed, that is really what's going on behind the language that is out front. So it's not just a linguistic competence, if you will, it's a sociolinguistics competence. It's being able to fill in gaps in discourse and how the individual is able to handle that language and use that language within their context, as Shankar was talking about. I also feel that it's also a cultural aspect to it, and part of the institutions receiving students. I think you know, I can probably, we all have these stories sitting around and, you know, perhaps sitting around in the faculty senate debrief, and there's one professor saying, well, I just need people to speak English. And, you know, I think we need a cultural shift that also views the literacies of the students as an asset and not as a deficit. Just because they may not be able to, you know, speak in Elizabethan English doesn't mean that they are lacking in what they can contribute. So if we can view what they have in their home language as an asset and how that contributes in the assessment process, I think we're moving much closer to addressing that question.
Jeff, I have sat in that faculty senate meeting that you referenced. So yeah, thank you for emphasizing the assets-based approach over the deficits-based. And I want to lean in a bit to this idea of the student-centered approach that you brought up, Alex, and that Shankar and Jeff have commented about as well, and the role that student-centered assessment plays in the idea that ensuring that learners are not just evaluated, but also that they feel empowered in this process. And there's more, how that contributes to lifelong learning and that passion for lifelong learning.
And I think, yeah, if I may, I mean, this comes back to that, and I talked about the authenticity of the task. And it's very easy to create an academic task where you may use a kind of rote, memorized phrase or so on and so forth, which I've learned. Can I really transpose that into my everyday experience? And I think this is where that authentic task comes in. And what we need to do and what we try to do is look at what will that day-to-day experience be of a candidate when I'm in a seminar, when I'm in a lecture, when I'm actually having to synthesize text into, and so on, and all those skills. Getting that task as close to what they'll be doing in a real life environment when they're studying. But again, it's an authentic task. It's not a prescripted rote memory exercise. And that really links in, Jeff. And that's the difficult thing, is writing into those tasks those communicative competencies, the ability to interact. And those competencies, again, reflect so many broad skills. And this is, again, really at the heart of Trinity. I mean, we're an educational charity, but we've always looked at that communicative competence. And that's what we try to pull out in those assessments. But it's the authenticity of task, i.e. reflecting real life, is so key.
No, if we've all been in situations where we've learned a different language. And if you think about putting yourself in those shoes, of how do you express yourself? I was terrible in learning Mandarin, but I did put myself out there, right? I mean, you have to be vulnerable. And this aspect that, Alex, you talk about, this communicative aspect, you need to be able to think about the student who's taking this test, that the object of that test is to make that journey to come to a new place, to be in a new learning environment, and then put themselves out there and become vulnerable. Right? And to be able to do that in a seminar, or even ask a question to a professor, or talk to some of your students, other classmates. So being able to do that, being able to assess that, is going to be very important. And I think if we keep that in mind, we might devise better ways to ask those questions, right? Contextualizing it is also important. Some cultural concepts people don't get. And if you test them on that cultural concept, that's not doing any service to that student. Neither is it helping me as a recipient of an international student to know that, well, they answered this question poorly, but there is no context for those students on that.
Keeping with this idea of the personalized approach to student learning, to language assessment, Jeff, I'm curious, I know you're very involved with TESOL and the advocacy groups, and being at the conferences and in the many language conferences you attend, what's the word on the street as far as innovations go and what we might expect in the future in terms of language assessment? What are people talking about making personalized feedback more actionable, for example?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I wish I had the crystal ball to be able to answer that. But immediately as you asked that, we broached that. I go to that. We've probably heard it before. I don't know if you've heard it, that AI thing.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Might have heard about that and the impact of that. And it is an area that has been of great benefit within the classroom to educators to have that, especially working with English learners. And I speak not from the perspective of ensuring that people have the skills they need before they come into the higher ed environment, but if you're part of an English language program, for example, and how you're dealing and working with, you might have a classroom full of 5 to 10 different languages, home languages that you're working with in that classroom. So I think the future is definitely going to be in AI. How that's going to manifest remains to be seen, but I really think it's imperative upon not just the educational community, but the associations and organizations, and to a certain degree the government associations, to ensure that there's guardrails that protect the students in this process, the ethical considerations that need to be there, but also addressing the concerns that an institution is going to have when it comes to the integrity of the exam and the authenticity of those students' responses in that process. So I think that's really where the future is going to be. Who knows? We all may be. I just saw where was it? It was somewhere, I think it was up in the Northeast, maybe up near you, Maureen. There was a private school, a high school that now everything is online and it's all virtual. Not just the sense of Zoom calls, but what do you call those things you put on your eyes for the? Yeah.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
I need to do a little catch up on that area. If you.
Yeah, goggles. Yeah. And so the students that you're referencing are at home and they're having this learning experience wearing their VR.
They're having their learning experience. A couple of years ago, I was talking to an entrepreneur that had developed, I don't think he ever got it off the ground, but he had developed a whole university experience in which the student was immersed in that VR environment to interact with it. So it's challenging. It's so rapid in its changing and the evolution, if you will, of what's going on and how that's going to translate into the experience that the student has, the mobility that the student has around the globe, and their ability to access learning. It's changing rapidly.
So let's stick with this, with the technology piece, and now apply it to the improvements and increases in access, in equity, and how it can, the personalized feedback really speaks to that access and equity piece of this conversation. Your thoughts, panel?
I think so. As an institution, we do take pride in making sure that there is equity and access, right? And the idea that we have to serve diverse student bodies.